Thank you all for being here, for staying through this quite, long day. It's not that long, but yeah, thank you for coming. I just want to start by playing. So this talk will center a lot around hearing and listening. I just want to play some of Joan Little's voice, I will talk more about her. Oh, that's not the right thing to do. Oh gosh. Should have tested this. If I want to play this, isn't it all the way?
Is
Okay.
it embedded or?
Yeah, it is.
Is it a link?
It should just play from here. Let's see.
Right.
Try enable editing at the top.
Yeah, up at the top.
Oh, sorry. Press the button.
And then right click it. So
Oh.
you can do this.
I can just get it on YouTube if that's easier.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Is to do. I was so frightened I didn't know what to do. So I can't even explain how I felt in that because it's even now it's unexplainable. You wouldn't even be able to understand it, until you're in my position.
And the
So, I wanted us to kind of focus more on how she sounded, not so much what she was saying. So my dissertation, Bodies in the Middle, uses each chapter to track a legal case and a novel at which Black women and sexual violence are at the center. I argue that these pairings demonstrate the difficulty with which Black women become intelligible to the law as victims of crimes. But at the same time that the line between justice and injustice is not so fixed. The artists I examine, Richard Wright, Gayl Jones, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, use the novel to showcase the creativity and its limits of Black women attempting to use the law to gain justice for crimes committed against their bodies and minds. Oftentimes, when Black women attempt to use the law, they have to use their voices in some way. I mean, think of any SVU episode you've ever seen, right? It's like there's a tearful confession, right? The voice is very central to how sexual violence gets legislated. I'll be using my talk today to touch on the variety of approaches to voice that Black women take in the context of sexual violence, race, and the law. The first time that I ever heard Joan Little's voice, she was laughing. Laughing so hard, in fact, that I also laughed. I was so startled to hear laughter, and at such a high volume, that I had to tear off my headphones. Laughter so loud that I had to lower the volume on the cassette player as I played this recorded interview in the very quiet and small room that is the Southern Historical Collection of the Wilson Library at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I never thought that I would be introduced to Joan Little's voice through her laughter. I first became acquainted with Joan Little's story through Danielle McGuire's book. Oh man. We almost got it, guys.
There we go.
Through Danielle McGuire's book, At the Dark End of the Street, which detailed a number of rape cases at which Black women were at the center from 1940 to 1974. Joan Little's is the final case in the book. In August of 1974, Joan Little is charged with the murder of Clarence Oligood, the white prison guard who sexually assaulted her. After a year-long trial, a global liberation movement which helped to build the Joan Little Defense Fund, and the civil rights movement inspired legal maneuvers of her white lawyer, Jerry Paul, and her Black lawyer, Karen Galloway, Little is acquitted in August of 1975. This case is at the center of the second chapter in my dissertation, and I read the trial with and against a novel, Corregidora, by Black feminist author Gayl Jones. Corregidora follows the protagonist, Ursa Corregidora, a blues singer living in 1940s Kentucky and trying to live with the stories she has inherited of 3 familial generations of sexual violence, beginning with their enslavement in Portugal. My work sits at the intersection of critical race studies, literary studies, history, and feminist theory. Though I'm not a musicologist, I wish Kyle was here, the two cases at the center of my second chapter, State of North Carolina v. Joan Little, and the 1974 novel by Gayl Jones, Corregidora, require an in-depth examination of the role of the voice. In this talk, I'll explain how voice is crucial to deepening our understanding of not only the legal case and the novel, but also the way that rape law racializes and genders consent. The voice and the sonic play special roles in both State v. Joan Little and Gayl Jones's novel, Corregidora. Corregidora is a 1974 novel that follows Ursa Corregidora, the blues singer, living in 1940s Kentucky. She is the fourth generation of a line of black women who were enslaved and coercively prostituted by a Portuguese family in Brazil. The primary enslaver and/or ancestor is referred to only as Old Man Corregidora. There are two ways that voice is central to the novel. First, critics have long referred to the novel as a blues novel, one that takes on what Doña Elizabeth Allen calls a blues linguistics. Not only is Ursa a blues singer, but the novel often takes on a blues aesthetic through the use of dialect, rhyming, rhythmic patterns, and excerpting blues lyrics. But the second role of voice is more essential to my dissertation. The Corregidora women use their voices to build what I call an alternative justice system, a long con to get revenge on the people who owned and brutalized them and burned all evidence of that brutalization. Ursa's great-gram uses repetitive oral storytelling to keep the account of the ways that she and her daughter, known as Gram, were violated. Gram and Great-Gram frame this telling and retelling of their story as a form of justice, not only for the crimes committed against them, but also for the erasure of those crimes from history. When I'm telling you something, don't ever ask if I'm lying, because they don't want to leave no evidence of what they'd done, so it couldn't be held against them. And I'm leaving evidence, and you got to leave evidence too, and your children got to leave evidence. And when it come time to hold up the evidence, we got to have evidence to hold up. That's why they burned all the papers, so there wouldn't be no evidence to hold up against them. Ursa inherits this familial perspective of justice, which is alternative, precisely because it takes the way that the American legal system fetishizes the voice, think of confessions on the witness stand, telephone records, deliberations, etc., to its most extreme conclusion. The voice is now the only form of evidence that the Corregidora women have at their disposal, and much of the novel focuses on how Ursa departs from and or replicates this obsession with the voice. Jennifer Conyard Black reads Ursa's many moments of silence throughout the novel as indicative of a rejection of white supremacist heteropatriarchy, which fills all space with speech, paper records, etc. But this kind of binary is not so persuasive. No specific race or gender has complete ownership over the oral tradition versus a written tradition. But of course, the baggage of racism and white supremacy lingers, so that certain bodies are associated with certain traditions and or even claim them as biologically determined. One might argue that Gayl Jones uses voice in Corregidora to make an essentialist claim that black women have a special relationship to orality. However, this is not an essentialist claim. It is one founded in systemic exclusion. As a reaction to the brutality with which slave masters have denied the Corregidora women their ability to vocally consent and or resist, those women create a private public through which their voices become one of their few sources of power. The case of Joan Little helps us to complicate the voice as a means of empowerment. What happens when the black woman attempts to use her voice to gain justice from a white supremacist system for a crime of sexual violence committed against her? When Joan Little is on the witness stand, her voice is of major concern in a literal sense. Both Jerry Paul, Little's defense attorney, and William Griffin, the prosecutor, examine and cross-examine her for hours, if not days. As a reminder, the prosecution, Griffin, is trying to prove that Joan Little premeditated the murder of her jailer, Clarence Alligood, so that she could escape the jail in Beaufort County, North Carolina. The defense, Paul, is trying to prove that Joan Little killed Alligood in self-defense to protect herself from sexual assault. Though he does not do this very explicitly, Griffin is keen to present Little to the jury as a bad black woman with low morals, low standards of her sexual and or romantic partners, and one who seduced Alligood. The notion of Little as a bad black woman is almost redundant, for the Beaufort County jury who indicts her for her murder. Sociologists hired by the defense, in fact, proved that racist myths around black female sexuality as lascivious, open to all who desire, incapable of resisting sex, and so on, persisted amongst the general population of this small rural county in North Carolina. All of this to say that there is a lot of history behind Griffin as he attempts to make the jury see Little as one who is incapable of resisting sex. The content of the cross-examination demonstrates this, but even in the way that Little is treated while she is on the witness stand puts strain on the extent to which the black woman can speak for herself. There are several times during both testimonies, and this isn't anything, just a fun picture from the archives of the testimony, nothing to read. But there are several times during both testimonies that Paul, Griffin, and even the judge request and or command Little to speak up or raise her voice. This often happens at especially sensitive moments when Little is asked to be graphic about what Alligood did to her. This repeated command leads me to wonder if the black female voice can actually be heard, especially when she is talking about sexual violence as a crime. The result of Little's trial, her acquittal, is certainly a sign of history changing course in a positive sense, towards a future in which black women are not only believed, but also action is taken to compensate the crimes committed against them. But the cynical side of Little's acquittal is that it did not come easily, not by a long shot. She was acquitted, as I mentioned, after a year of fundraising, demonstrations outside of the courthouse, and constant and persistent manipulations of the legal system. In other words, Little's case proves that the black woman can be heard, and even believed, if the white supremacist legal system is coerced into hearing and believing her. This written record does great injustice to Little, and a sincere disservice to future researchers of this case, because the stenographer writes all of Little's responses to questions in what Gayl Jones calls in her book of literary criticism, Liberating Voices, Oral Tradition in African American Literature, Standard American English. Rather than record the rural North Carolinian dialect in which Little speaks, which we heard a bit of, the stenographer removes this identifying aspect of her voice from the record. The stenographer's decision to erase Little's dialect works to incorporate Little into the nation, into citizenship, into a space of a defendable femininity that is legible to the legal system as such. So we may see the subtext of Little's refusal to speak up or raise her voice as a resistance to this incorporation, a means of rejecting these additional attempts by white men and white male-dominated systems to control her. I am happy to sit in the uncomfortable space in which both of these instrumentalizations of voice by black female rape survivors coexist, in which the voice can be both a source of power and one of frightening manipulation against them, a tool for justice for the crimes committed against them, as well as a way of erasing them from the record. When juxtaposed, the case of Joan Little and the novel Corregidora eliminate any and all simplistic views of black women's use of their voice as wholly liberating and or entirely restricting. Instead, we have to look more deeply at the circumstances under which these voices erupt. These specific circumstances are especially crucial where sexual violence and the law are concerned, given the ways in which rape law continues to center vocal resistance as the site at which consent is either present or not. Just look at the testimony that was given, if people saw it, by Dr. Nassers, who was a doctor for many young gymnasts. There was a great power to all that testimony, right? We can learn a great deal about our present moment through Joan Little and the Corregidora women. How are the voices of black women present or not in the #MeToo movement, for example? How are those voices being filtered in or out of the public by white women's voices, who seem to be the most visible leaders, even though the movement was created by Tarana Burke, a black woman? So to end, I want to return to Joan Little's laughter. Though James Reston, the white journalist who wrote The Innocence of Joan Little, the only book-length work on the case, also presents Little in problematic ways through his own writing, I am so grateful to him for recording her voice, as well as the voices of other characters in her story. And I can't let you hear what I got to hear in the archives, because I'm not allowed to record that stuff. Without Reston, I would never have heard Little laugh. I would never have gotten a sense of the depth of her accent, the way that she said regardless, with almost all of the middle letters missing, the way she spoke softly but forcefully when she felt that Reston was misunderstanding her, the nearly bored and or exhausted tone of voice she used to respond to his questions she had probably rehearsed answers to 1,000 times because Reston records the interview only days before the trial begins. So I want to end by briefly telling the story behind Joanne Little's laugh. So just as Reston is beginning the interview with her, another black woman, likely Karen Galloway, her second lawyer, interrupts by showing Little a picture of herself in the newspaper. So I only have my weird transcription of this to show you. So Reston says, "I know it can't be very easy, can it? This whole process. I mean, you're suddenly a national figure." Little, yeah. Reston, "Now what kind of a laughs loud?" I'm not gonna laugh, actually laugh. "Let me see, I didn't see that." Laughs again. Galloway, "They wanted to get you looking as bad as they could." Laughing. Little laughs. "Indecipherable, brothers up to now." More laughing. Galloway, "You should see the other one." Ha 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 ha. "Printed all over the newspaper. You look pitiful, child." I know it. "They wanted you to look as pitiful as they could." Laughing. "Did I look pitiful? You came across real good." This moment in which Galloway and Little are laughing is almost a microcosm of the powerful impact of the black female voice to interrupt and or disrupt white supremacy and or whiteness. Reston is trying to begin the interview, but he is abruptly interrupted. What's especially exciting to me is that these black women's voices disrupt white male control so loudly and with such ferocious glee. At the same time, Little and Galloway are sharing laughter over white supremacist representation of Little. And just as an aside, I couldn't know exactly which photo they're laughing over. I'm kind of hoping it's this one where she's looking at Julian Bond, who might be familiar to some of us. I'm really glad I have a photo of him with that afro. In order to be legible as a victim of sexual violence, she has to look pitiful, as they say, downtrodden. And they emphasize that they wanted her to look this way. They wanted her to look as pitiful as they could. That both Galloway and Little were able to take this moment to lampoon this attempt, to laugh in the face of a system hell-bent on misrecognizing their impact, is not just in asserting the empowering force of the black woman's voice, it is showing the irreverence with which that voice can react to others' attempts to squash, belittle, and control. I only wish you could have heard them laughing too, that you could have sat alongside me in that quiet archive and heard them laughing so loudly that it scared me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.